few weeks ago, Night Dive Studios, together with Machine Games, brought us yet another remaster which we may or may not have asked for, which bears the unfortunate name of Quake 2, which they should have actually called Quake 2 Enhanced. So now we have Quake 2, which is the newer version, and the old one is now called Quake 2 Original, just to keep things confusing for everyone. I hate it when they do this. But anyway, that aside, let's talk first about Quake 2 Original. I'm gonna be honest with you, this is one of my least favorite games that it released back in the day. I played the game close to its release, finished it, and then never looked back. It just did not make much of an impact on me, and I could not explain why. Recently, just a few years ago, I replayed it after many years, and this time I could better pinpoint exactly what I did not like so much about it. Now, before you press that dislike button that Google is desperately trying to get rid of to placate big businesses, I do not wish for this to be an anti-Quake 2 rant. I don't hate the game, I think it's perfectly serviceable and I can see why it has a cult following, but there are just a few things that had a negative impact on my enjoyment of the game. Until the enhanced version, that is. More on that later. The first issue was that despite having a 2 in the title, the game has very little to do with Quake. In fact, the game was originally going to be called something else entirely, but in the end it decided to change it to Quake 2 because of the original's brand name recognition. Yes, it's a fast-paced, dark sci-fi shooter with labyrinthine level design, but the similarities mostly end there. Id apparently wanted to make their new shooter a bit less arcadey and a bit more realistic in big quotation marks by altering some of the game's mechanics. For example, they eliminated air control, which made jumping a bit more annoying and finicky than it should be. They also made it so the weapon swapping was no longer instant, to the point where you have to wait for the first weapon to finish its firing animation before you can switch to the next one. I guess it does make the fighting a bit more tactical, but I think that this has an overall negative impact on a shooter that is still very fast-paced at the end of the day. They also added an annoying recoil effect to the assault rifle. Just why? I point these kinds of things out since it is interesting to see how this game made some of the first step in the evolution, or maybe devolution, of first-person shooters. When they started out, they were very fast-paced, very arcadey, with balls-to-the-walls action, but as time progressed, things started progressing towards a slower and more realistic gameplay, again in quotation marks. Speaking of weapons, this is one area where Quake 2 drops the ball in my opinion. The weapons are fine, they get their job done, and the enemy design and the encounters keep the player on his toes, as you have to constantly switch weapons back and forth to adapt to the current threat. The problem is that the arsenal is by and large bog standard. Shotguns, single and double barreled, machine gun, chain gun, rocket launcher, grenade launcher, 2 types of energy weapons, one of them being the classic BFG. Out of these, the double-barrel shotgun is probably going to be the main workhorse, seeing how most fighting takes place over short distances and the sheer amount of shells lying around. Only 3 weapons are slightly more original, and out of those, 2 of them suck straw balls. The blaster is one of the worst beginning weapons ever created in a shooter. It sounds weak, the projectiles are very slow, and in general its only use is to be utilized as a very annoying to use flashlight through the game's many dark hallways. The grenades are a pain to use, the animation looks cool but it's super slow, not to mention you can't throw them very far, so you'll be stacking on grenades in your inventory until you get your hands on the grenade launcher. Lastly, the best weapon in Quake 2's arsenal, and one which immediately became its crown jewel, is of course the railgun, which is a super fun weapon to use, especially in multiplayer where a high level player can make the best use of it. The expansions added a few new weapons as well. The most notable one in my opinion is the Iron Ripper, which fires bouncing projectiles, sort of like the Ripper from Unreal, except not as cool since you can decapitate enemies with it. The enemies in Quake 2 are quite varied when it comes to their behavior, with a large assortment of ranged and melee types. Infantry, for example, is weak, however they can still fire a couple more shots before kicking the bucket for good after you've gunned them down. Enemies can also dodge slow-moving missile fire, and just like in previous hit games, they will also turn on one another if they are accidentally hit by friendly fire. One cool feature is that their texture changes dynamically according to how much damage they've taken. Now that's what I call attention to detail, and it should be a staple in every single game in my opinion. The problem though is that, just like the rest of the game, they all look very samey. It opted for a unified theme for Quake 2 and they ran it into the ground. Everything looks the same. The weapons, the enemies, the levels, everything meshes together into this boring ass brown, orange, grey looking shit, which leads to a brain numbing boredom after only a few dozen minutes of gaming time. The level layout, however, is one of the best I've ever seen in a shooter. There are many twists and turns and the player must have a good sense of orientation to navigate them, yet at the same time they use clever visual cues and are built in a certain way such that the player isn't forced to wander around aimlessly too much. I did not call it level design because design implies more than just layout. Like I said earlier, everything was the same. It's just the same industrial maps over and over again. Unless you are a huge fan of the industrial look, Quake 2 is not a game that can be played for too long before boredom starts to sink in. The gameplay overall is classic boomer shooter. Run around maze-like levels, shoot loads of enemies, collect medkits, ammo and power-ups, discover secrets and look around for keys to collect, buttons to press and levels to pull in order to proceed to the next level. Actually, there is one thing that bears mentioning. In Quake 2, each level is called a unit, which is broken up into smaller sized sub-levels. This means that the player will often have to achieve objectives in sub-levels in order to open up previous ones. This might sound like there is a ton of annoying backtracking to do, but as I said, the layout is cleverly done and so the backtracking is kept at a minimum. The sound design is average, but at least some enemies have audio cues so you can hear them before they can see you. The weapons sound just as uninspired as the rest of their design is. The music is great, however, and is one of the more memorable things about the game. It's this very angry, grungy sounding OST that heavy metal fans can listen to even outside the game. I still prefer the original Quake's music as those dark ambient tracks go even better together with that game's overall look and feel. You will notice that I haven't talked about two aspects of the game, the story and the multiplayer. First of all, this is a boomer shooter. Why do you even care about the story? All that matters is that there are these ugly looking alien cyborg things that you have to kill. End of story. Secondly, I have never played Quake 2 multiplayer. I never played it back in the day because everyone was playing Quake 1 in net cafes, and after Counter-Strike came out, people switched to that one. But now, thanks to the new enhanced version, maybe I'll give it a try someday if GOG Galaxy weren't such a buggy piece of shit that can't seem to update itself. The game received two official expansion packs, The Reckoning and Ground Zero, both of which add more levels, more enemies, more weapons and more power-ups. They are also a bit more difficult than the base game due to the fact that the game is far less generous with health and ammo pickups, but also because the devs decided to be assholes and add many cheap encounter designs with long corridors that don't allow you to dodge enemy fire, as well as tons of gotcha moments where enemies gank you from behind from concealed doors. Now, the enhanced version of the game added quite a few things, chief among them being two more campaigns, one of them being the Nintendo 64 levels. I have only briefly tried a few levels, but from what I can tell they are smaller and less complex than the originals, so in case someone wants to try Quake 2 or boomer shooters in general for the first time, then playing the N64 campaign first would probably be a good idea. Second of all, the enhanced version comes with a brand new mission pack by the name of Call of the Machine, which again I have only briefly played, but apart from a few unfortunate modernizations, it looks like a high quality campaign with levels that look less samey than the originals. This new version added a few new things such as a weapon and power-up wheel that slow down time when used, which is kind of a cheat, but I admit using it a bit more often than I thought I would, since the arsenal in this game is huge and it can quickly become a challenge selecting the right weapon for the right opponent in the heat of battle. There is also now a quest compass that shows you the way to the next objective, which is a downright cheat code in my opinion, but at least they had the decency to make it optional. And to be fair, sometimes the levels are a bit too jumbled and too samey looking, so this can spare the player entire minutes of frustrations trying to get his bearings, especially if you come back to a save days later when you've forgotten everything that you were supposed to do. It also fixes some of the small things that made the original annoying to play. For example, on my machine at least, in the original there used to be this minuscule delay between when you press the fire button and when the weapon actually fired, but now this is instant. This small improvement made the game infinitely more bearable for me. They also tweaked the recoil from the assault rifle to where it's no longer as ridiculous as it used to be. The game now comes with a couple of very cool features in the menu. First of all, you can select which level to play right from the get-go. You start off with several appropriate weapons and a small amount of ammo to get you going. This is a very nice quality of life feature for those who wish to replay certain levels, though I'm not sure why you would, since most of them look and play almost identically. The other feature is a gallery mode called It Vault, where you get to see all the game models in 3D with the ability to switch between old and enhanced, as well as artworks and other assorted game information. It is clear that Night Dive and Machine Games had a lot of love for this game. Overall, the Enhanced Edition is a good remaster of an average game. It still hasn't turned me into a Quake 2 fan, but I can safely say that I would play this over the original any day of the week. I'm sure that there are many fans out there who notice far more changes than I did and who are not so keen on them, but in my opinion this has become the definitive version to play, especially for someone who is new to the series. Until next time, happy fragging!